Welcome to the Teachers College webinar series on teaching and leading in times of uncertainty. Today we are very lucky to be hearing from Professors Nathan Holbert and Paolo Blickstein on the topic of meaningful making, bringing the learning revolution to home and school. Professor Holbert is an assistant professor of communication, media, and learning technologies design in the Mathematics, Science, and Technology department. He's an expert in how children engage in testing, tinkering, and sense-making during play. Professor Blickstein is an associate professor of learning design technology in the same department and also an affiliate associate professor in computer science and data science at Columbia University. He is an expert in technologies for learning, low-cost technologies, and maker education, and the creator of the FabLearn program. It is wonderful to see so many people interested in this important topic, and I would encourage you all to ask questions for Professor Holbert and Blickstein in the Q&A tab. We will endeavor to answer as many questions as possible. The chat feature is also enabled, so feel free to discuss the session, share resources and reflections there, but please be respectful in your interactions. Again, should you have a question, please use the Q&A tab and please include your name and your location for context. Finally, we plan on sending out a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as answers to any frequently asked questions that come up during today's session. With that out of the way, it is a great pleasure to hand over to Professors Holbert and Blickstein and to learn more about meaningful making.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here with us today. It's very exciting to have you all here. Before we get underway, I want to give you a URL. We kind of want to get a sense of why you decided to join us today for this webinar. This is not a test, and this is not something that we're going to tabulate and do all sorts of research on. We just want to sort of invite you, though, to respond to this question about why you're here, why you're interested in making for your classroom or for your school, and we'll bring that back into the conversation as we go today. Again, very excited to have you guys here. It's nice. I feel inspired. I feel energized whenever I'm able to be in a room full of educators, even if it's a Zoom room. Any kind of room I'll take with other people these days, because I'm sure you've noticed the world is an absolute mess these days, right? There is all sorts of social and political chaos. We have a virus that's ravaging people across the planet and cities across the planet. The planet itself is warming at such a rapid degree that soon we worry that this is going to be an irreversible trend. There's in the world quite daunting, and when it's daunting like this, I often kind of would like to be able to say, I hope those climate scientists get it together. I hope those epidemiologists figure out how to address these problems. I hope those politicians, sure hope they could get their act together so that they could get us out of this mess. But in reality, I know that the mess that we're in is very much a mess that involves education. It's very much a mess that we as educators have to step up and address. If we are going to, raise up generations of young people that see the world differently, that look beyond our current limits to start imagining and dreaming and designing new technologies, systems, and societies that are fundamentally different than ones that we've created that have really got us in this mess, it's going to be on us. Unfortunately, I suspect many of us feel similar, that the educational system that we have right now is very ill-suited for this. It doesn't value thinking and exploration. It's designed for correctness. It's designed for coverage, for trying to get kids to quickly accumulate as many facts as possible and then regurgitate those, whether or not that regurgitation has any value or any use for things that they actually want to deal with. Our education system, as it has existed for decades, is really unprepared for the situation that we're in. But we do know better ways to do this, right? We know that learning happens best when people are invited to play with ideas, when they're given room to explore, to create, to iterate on ideas, when they're given time to work through projects, work through experiences that they care about, that leverage their particular perspectives, that leverage their values and the values of their communities, when they work towards. We also know that it makes a difference if we have an educational system that empowers young people to see themselves as agents of change, capable of actually making a difference in this world that we have together here. Thankfully, it's not just up to us. We have also Silicon Valley here to show us the way forward, to correct all the. I'm just really absolutely thrilled that my friend Paulo Blix, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, the man who rubs shoulders with VCs, who Mark Zuckerberg once called the most attractive man he knows, is here with us today. And so I'm going to have a brief conversation with Paulo to see if he can help us think about how we're going to solve the problems that we have. So Paulo, you know, schools are challenging. They're not great. I know in Silicon Valley, you guys have solutions for really everything. You love to disrupt things. Can you say a little bit about how you plan on disrupting our educational system?
Yeah, sure. Nathan, thank you so much. So, one word, disruption. And I mean, when I was in fourth grade, I had this amazing teacher, and she told me, like, you have to work hard. And so Work Hard is the name of my startup. And we have this, our motto is work hard, play hard, learn hard. So we call it 3 MHs of learning. And the way we think about learning is that everything is wrong and we need to reinvent it and reimagine it and redo it and rebuild it. And that's exactly what we're doing in my company.
Wow, that sounds like something. I wonder if you're familiar with this sort of maker movement, this sort of making education thing. Do you, is this something that's on your radar? Is this something you're working with in the M whatever corporation?
My company is called the Work Hard Corporation. Okay,
oh, right.
I'd appreciate if you'd mention the correct name.
Sorry.
So, I mean, making is really super important. It is a new thing, and we do it because it's really new and kind of cool. So, we learn by making. So if we learn by making, why not like do it in schools, right? So we learn by cooking, and we learn by like making conversation, making stuff. So in our product, like our company, we believe that kids should make all the time. So we give them like popsicle sticks and some glue guns and stuff, and we tell them, go make something, change the world and like disrupt and break things and move fast and all of that. And if you buy the premium, the premium version of the product, which we do with like richer kids, you can also get robotics and all of that. But basically, it's like we need less of this kind of education stuff and more like just doing stuff, and that's what we're doing. And we have, tons of VC money, and it's working really well.
So, okay. Can you say a bit about how, like, with the popsicle sticks, the premium popsicle sticks, what exactly are they what do they learn in that program?
Well, I mean, you education people, I mean, you're always like, what do they learn and whatever? Like, who cares? Like, we want them to make stuff and be engineers and kind of, we are in a fierce competition with China. We need more engineers and more makers and more stuff. So it's not really about like, oh, are they learning or not? It's just, give them the stuff, and the best will raise to the top, and they will lead our country out of, this STEM pipeline thing, and we're going to win this competition. So, if we keep like theorizing and, talking about all this education stuff, we're never going to get there. That's why we are really here to disrupt, to break things, and not like, I'm sorry, I know you're like a professor and stuff, but you're not really helping, because you're like all this blah, blah, blah. And we are here like, just doing the stuff that needs to be done.
But what about the educators, here that, like, what do they do in their classroom tomorrow? How do we?
Well, I think, people need to really disrupt education. So I'm not going to tell them what to do in there. I mean, they have to figure out by themselves. And like, we have the popsicle sticks. It's really cheap, it's a subscription model. And then, they just take it and do it. And then the kids are building like houses out of popsicle sticks, and they're makers. Now they're makers because they're making things. And that's our product. And then, I mean, I don't feel like I should be, you know, giving all this detail to people. Just go on our website, subscribe.
All right. I think before you start giving out websites where people have to start giving you more money, we want to pause this here. I mean, this you know, is unfortunately, I think oftentimes what we hear about making, this is oftentimes what we hear about education, or the ways in which technologies are going to save us, or Silicon Valley is going to save us. And you know, there's a lot of great words that our tech bro pitch to us, and sometimes those words sound right and they feel nice and they get us a little excited. But you know, what's actually there behind it? What's actually the theories? What's actually the evidence? What is the vision for a future that our tech bro has? And we have to ask ourselves: is that the vision of the future that we want? It's good, I think, and it's appropriate to be inspired by domains where people create, and it's reasonable to be inspired and excited by new technologies and new ideas. But we also have to have theories to situate that inspiration. We also need empirical evidence that validates any transformation that we want to propose for our educational systems. And you know, we have to have practical ideas and solutions for how to actually make it happen in the educational system that we actually have today, so that we can make it happen in our classrooms. We do have some of this evidence. We do have good theories for this, and that's what we want to talk with you about today. So I want to start by kind of giving you this idea of constructionism. This is an idea that was first proposed back in the 1970s and 80s. And today you often hear about, or we often talk about constructionism in the context of things like computing education or maker education. And this is really about engaging young people in designing and constructing physical or virtual artifacts. And at the heart of making and the heart of constructionism is that we're not just trying to rethink how we do education. We're not just trying to disrupt educational systems. We're also trying to think about how we can support young people in developing rich, inquiry-driven lives. So what is constructionism? Where did it come from? And how will making help us to address the many challenges that we talked about initially in this presentation? And how can also it work in our classrooms right away? I'll invite now the real Paulo Blickstein to share with us that.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, we're so lucky to have this special invited guest, but he left. So now you're stuck with me. And so, you know, Nathan was talking about constructionism just a moment ago, and it relates to a very old idea, which is this idea of hands-on learning, right? That you all know, you've heard about it. And this dates back to, you know, 100 years ago, John Deere, who is, you know, one of the statues here at TC, and Fergal and Seymour Papert, Paulo Freire, Edith Ackerman, Cynthia Sol. There are like enormous amount of people that have theorized about, you know, why is hands-on learning so powerful and so important. And I think one way to look at it that I particularly like is what Edith Ackerman says about hands-on learning, which is, you know, the next slide, that it's not really just about hands-on, but it's also about heads in. So what she means by that is, you know, it's not just doing stuff with your hands. If you're not cognitively engaged in that construction, you might be doing something, but you're not necessarily learning. And, you know, I in my own experience, sometimes I'm cooking and I'm not paying attention to anything I'm doing. I'm just doing it automatically, or just like tinkering with ingredients, but not really paying attention to what I'm doing. And, you know, if you ask me, what did you do? What did you learn? I would say nothing. I just did the food. I just cooked the food. And a lot of times when people think about hands-on learning, they forget the heads-in part. So the part that we know from empirical work, that if you don't reflect on what you're doing, you're not going to learn as much. And that's relates a lot to the way constructionist researchers explain why hands-on is important. So it's sort of a three-step model. And so what constructionists say is that hands-on learning is powerful and important. It's not so much just about, oh, I'm using my hands and that's all. It's because when you build something, you're embedding in that creation, in that product, in that artifact, your mental models about how the world works, right? So for example, if you want to build a car, a miniature car that goes really fast, and your mental model is that, a lot of batteries will make a car fast. You put a lot of batteries in the car, right? So a lot of mental models you have about the world will be embedded in those constructions. The second part of that process is that as you test and revise and debug your constructions, you're also debugging your mental models. So, you thought, oh, and this car thing actually happened, in a classroom, that the kid had this idea that if you put tons of batteries, it's going to go fast. And then he built the car and he realized the car was really slow. And then he realized, oh my God, the batteries are making the car super heavy. So speed is related both to power, the batteries, and the weight of the car, So in that process, as he tested and revised his car, he realized, okay, my mental model was oversimplified. And now I have to add a new element to it, which is, the car cannot be too heavy because, light things go faster and all of that. So, just imagine if you are engaged in this process of building things, it's not just the building, it's also the testing, the debugging, the revision of your products. And then the third step is that you're also in a social environment. So you're sharing your products with others, your artifacts. People are helping you, and you're also surrounded by more able adults or peers. And all of that social interaction is also feeding into the complexity of your construction, the debugging of the mental models and all of that. So, hands-on is powerful because it allows you to embed the mental models that you have. It allows you to debug your models, to change, refine your understandings by refining a physical thing that's also at the same time revising your mental constructs. And also because it's shared, it's an object outside of your brain, right? It's a physical thing. It allows for very powerful social interaction, in the space. And particularly, particularly the interesting about making that I think is interesting is that, what you might say, so what's the big deal with like 3D printers and like laser cutters and all of that? And a lot, you should think of those things as amplifiers of your hands or your mind. So those machines, they're not just like cool stuff, but they amplify what you can do, right? So if you think about, those machines or kits and all of that, it's not just that school technology. It's that it allows you to do things that with your own hands and simpler materials, you wouldn't be able to do. So I remember, a story with my dad when, one of the times he came to my lab, that's in the next slide. I was showing him, a few machines, and then I demoed him, the laser cutter, and he had never seen a laser cutter. And then, I asked him, okay, draw something here. We're going to cut it out of wood. And then, he was so surprised. He said, oh my God, this machine is doing, like creating the physical object for me. It's kind of coming out of my head into a physical. So he said, there is no bad student anymore. Like everybody can be a good student. And what he meant was that, well, a lot of the obstacles in making things, in making, complex objects is sometimes your like skill with your hands in, going to like a wood shop and knowing all the techniques to do things. And so all of this is very time consuming. And he was surprised of how those machines made that whole process fast and easier. So it's almost like a machine that helps you concretize what's in your mind in a much faster way. And that's a very powerful thing for schools, because time is in such short supply in schools. So, and that's something that people often don't realize, is that if you can make things happen, within the constraints, the time constraints of schools, that's really powerful. So it's easy to experiment. It's easy to redo things. And finally, imagine people say, is it, can you do maker education only with, pieces of wood and nails? And I mean, that's sort of the same as painting with one color and only your fingers, right? You can paint with, one color and finger paint, but it's not, your expressive powers are not going to be the same compared to if you have, 24 colors and several paint brushes and all of that. So, of course, it's possible to do making with simpler materials, but the more sophisticated materials you have, the more you are opening up, the ways kids can express themselves. And so those three are important things about making. It amplifies what you can do. It amplifies your powers to concretize your ideas, and it's the more stuff you have, the more you can do. So this is an interesting project that one of Nathan's classrooms. It happened in one of Nathan's classrooms, and here you can see on the top left corner a drawing, right, and of this building. And if you didn't have, maker tools, imagine like it would be really hard to build this actual, thing in real life. But, this kid was able to design on a computer. You can see that on the lower corner, and then laser cut all the parts, and then, assemble it together into this, beautiful kind of city construction and all of that. So, that's sort of the cycle of constructionism and maker tools and all of that. You have these tools, you come up with ideas, and you can concretize them, in constructions that would otherwise be impossible. So now I'll pass back to Nathan for a question we're going to ask you. You muted me.
Actually, Paula, why don't we jump ahead to talk through? Why don't you jump ahead to talk through the goals here? We'll do the answers in a moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So we'll go back to that.
Are you waiting on me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I have a bit of a delay here. So, Paulo, why don't you talk through a couple of the different goals that you think of whenever you think of why do making in a classroom or in a school?
Yeah. So, that's all great. We talked about maker tools, constructionism, all of that. But one of the things we're going to really talk to you about is that it's really important to pick your battles, right? So there are many ways to use maker tools in schools, and not all of those modalities are right for every single school. So, for example, in some schools, can you go to the next slide then? So out of all the possible goals of maker education, sometimes, it's about, for example, gender equity in technology. I think, can you go back to the slide?
Is it not showing up?
No, I think you have to go back to the slides. You're showing the word cloud. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. So, in some places it's about supporting, for example, gender equity in STEM. In other places it's about developing cultural identity, right? So that's another possible goal. I've been to schools where, what they care about is developing a design sensibility, for example. You can keep going on the slides. Okay, yeah. So design sensibility. In some other places, it's about exposing students to engineering or fostering creativity. So, our point here is that it's really hard to do all of those things at the same time. So, sometimes we go to talk to a school principal or a teacher, and they say, I want my kids to be creative, to be exposed to engineering, to design sensibility, I want to design culturally meaningful stuff. And I want to address issues of gender, of the STEM pipeline, and et cetera. And it's really hard to do all of that at the same time. And what ends up happening is that people cannot, they cannot do all of those things. And it's really important to pick your battle, like to pick what are the priorities for your school system. And, one thing that we often talk about that happens when you are trying to do everything at the same time. So you have 20 goals for your maker program, is that it's what we call the Keychain syndrome. So what is the Keychain syndrome is that, I remember this case when I was working with a school, and I talked to the principal, and they said, oh, it's great. The kids are making, keychains in the maker lab, and everybody loves the keychains. They are doing laser cutting, and they give keychains to their parents, to their friends. And then I went back the next week and I said, okay, what are the kids doing now? And said, oh, they are making keychains because the keychains are so successful. Everybody wants a keychain. And then I went back, a couple of times later, and they were just doing keychains in this maker lab for several weeks, because making keychains were so successful, like it was such a popular thing that they couldn't go into anything else, and they couldn't go deeper into anything else because, they were like in love with, this laser cut keychain. So what we call the keychain syndrome is the danger that by trying to do too much in your maker lab or in your maker program, you end up being stuck doing very simple things that don't allow kids to go deep into projects, to learn, deeper things, to explore outside of their comfort area and all of that. And then your maker lab, instead of being a place for learning, it becomes a place to do this kind of cool little figurines, keychains, Star Wars figurines and all of that. But the kids are not really engaged in anything meaningful. And so that's a kind of cautionary tale for, when you start thinking about those programs.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I was messing up the slides as I was unsure where you were seeing and where I am. I think I'm a few seconds behind you all, but and this was the word cloud that you saw apparently. But the idea that many of the things that are bringing you here are an interest in student engagement, play, equity, to have some choice and agency, inquiry, growth mindset. This is really exciting. This is, I think, as Paulo suggested, there's many different reasons you might be interested in making your education. And one of our suggestions here is to sort of narrow your focus, to focus on one or two of these kinds of things so you can really start to make it happen in a really meaningful way in your classrooms. Great. The tools, the technologies that we use, the materials that we use, they can play a really profound role in our thinking process. And that's a big part of what making is about. That's a big part of the theories of constructionism that Paulo suggested as well. But as also was highlighted with the keychain syndrome, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just become machines that we use to kind of mass produce junk. So how can we think about the ways in which making is more than just technology, more than just fads, right? Many of you might be thinking of, well, we've been talking that making is something that's been going on, for a long, long time. There's a lot about what it means to make that's not new here. We can get excited about laser cutters and 3D printers. We can get excited about fabrication labs and maker spaces, but we should also be thinking about the tools and the materials of the wood shop, the kitchen, as Paolo was suggesting the graffiti artists, and also, things like the knitting circle. What are the craft work, the knowledge, and the ways of thinking and questioning that have been developed over decades and centuries of making? How can we learn from the techniques and the practices of these craftsmen? And how can we be receptive and also inviting to those that already make up these communities that have been engaged in these practices for many, many years, as we into new tech spaces, into new kind of collaborations to imagine new directions forward. A nice example of this that Leah Buckley really pioneered in many ways was the integration of computing and electronics with textile crafts. What other kinds of domains that already exist and other types of crafts that already exist can we think of as integrating into these classroom practices? And we should also be receptive to new practices and new kinds of perspectives that may not have been given first class status as art or as craft. Right? What kinds of technologies are kids taking apart at home and repurposing, like Grandmaster Flash? What kinds of tools, what kinds of art forms, what cultures, what kinds of are they creating at home? How can we take these experiences seriously and actually support and cultivate them in classrooms? Paulo has, I think, a nice story about how he's thought about these kinds of practices and about integrating these kinds of practices in maker experiences.
Yeah, so I will tell you quickly a story from a study I did in Heliópolis in São Paulo in Brazil. So I was, still a grad student, and I designed this whole kind of maker workshop project that was focused on energy. So I wanted kids to build, devices to save energy, kind of saving the environment and all of that. So let me kind of, summarizing the story. So you can see in the next slide, I'm there many years ago with all my hair, talking to the kids and the community leaders. And I told them, I'm bringing all these robotic kits. I want you to build, stuff that's meaningful to you, this energy saving devices. So, go and find out how you can save energy, like, design a device for heating water, or maybe for turning on the TV when it's not being used and all of that. So, I presented this idea, and then everybody was looking at me like in a weird way. And then, one of the students came up to me and said, let me take you to our community. Let me show you how we live and what kinds of issues we have here. So they took me to the community, and they showed me all this, that they had all these illegal energy connections because they didn't have energy meters. It was a low income community in São Paulo, and they didn't have money to pay for energy. So they would just grab energy from, a wire and kind of do an illegal connection and, have electricity. And they said, your idea makes no sense because we don't have energy meters, and we have so little things in our homes that, it's even kind of offensive to tell us we have to save energy, right? And so, I started to feel, terribly embarrassed by my, terrible idea. But they kept going. They said, well, actually, we do have a problem around energy, and it's not about saving energy, but, as you can see, a lot of these connections are unsafe, right? There are fires in the community because, people do unsafe connections, these illegal connections, and then sometimes their houses catch fire and stuff like that. So what is meaningful to us, what we would love to do in this workshop, instead of energy saving devices, we want to create materials like a little documentary and a community newspaper to teach people how to do safe illegal connections, right? So you can see the girls there, doing the research and doing the documentary about this new idea that they had. So I think what this story was a big lesson for me, but it taught me that a lot of times we as educators, we think we know what is meaningful to people. We think we know what, their culture is about and all of that. But often, we really have to listen to the kids. We have to get to know them. We have to get to know their communities in order to design stuff that's really meaningful to the community. And often it's completely different from what we think, it's completely different from the ideas that we had, and we had to have, be humble to say, okay, actually, I had the wrong idea, and I need to learn more. And so that was a big lesson for me, and I hope it also, serves to illustrate the importance of listening to the kids and to the community.
So thank you, Paulo. The next step here, and it's going to be you again, is to be thinking about, Paulo and I are sharing with you some interesting stories of Keychain syndrome, and I think a fantastic illustration of how we need to actually kind of listen and connect with our communities and connect with the experiences of the people in which we work with. But how do you actually do it? How are you going to make this happen in your classroom once things start up again in the fall, in whatever form they take? So we're going to take 2 examples of kind of prompts or topics that we might imagine being things that you currently are teaching, or things that you've thought about teaching, and maybe they're not the exact examples for you, but we're going to talk through how we can rethink those experiences, those ideas, in a kind of maker-like way. So Paulo, why don't you start us out with the nervous system? You're muted.
So yeah, I saw in the Q&A some people saying, how do you do this in a real classroom, right? So this is an example of that. So this is done in a kind of, not as any special school. It's a school in Brazil, actually a public school in Brazil, and I've been working with this school system. And so the story here is that this teacher, so there is a maker lab in this school, and there is a teacher that takes care of the lab. His name is Cesar, you can see there in this slide. And the science teacher wanted to do something different. He needed to teach the nervous system, the human nervous system, and he wanted to do something different, but he didn't know how. And so he paired up with the maker teacher in the school. And what they did was to redesign a unit that was already there, that had to be taught anyways, to include a lot of the maker tools. So, and this is completely teacher generated, right? So what they did was to, instead of doing like lecturing about the nervous system and saying, oh, there is the brain, we have like the senses, and then we control muscles and stuff like that. They created a sort of a kit with a some low cost electronics for kids to create their own neurons, right? So they had to, for example, create a model of the eyelid, right? That when an object comes to your eye, your eyelids close, right? So they had parts to create the sort of a model of the eyelid, or a model of like your knee, how it reacts when you kind of bump your knee into something, or a few other things. So they got this low-cost set of materials, and you can see the next slide. I really like this picture because it's like the textbook is kind of submerged in all this. Can you go back one? The textbook is kind of submerged in all these materials, and so the kids, instead of like just memorizing the nervous system, they're building their own neurons, right? And all of the materials were designed to fit into the 45-minute class period that they had. So we don't have time to go into all that went into it, but it worked in a 45-minute. And then in the next slide, you see that another activity that was part of this, after they were done with the making, they had to reflect on this activity. And this is all in Portuguese, but they had to say, okay, so what you see here is this kind of worksheet where they had to associate the electronic components to a function and to the human equivalent, right, of that. So for example, the light sensor, which is the first line, if you can read Portuguese, you see it says, what's the function? And the kid wrote, that's the eye, right? And the function is to be an eye. And what's the equivalent in the human body? The eye. And then the cables that were connecting things, what's the equivalent in the human body? Oh, those are the nerves, right? The little kind of robotic thing, what's the equivalent? Is the brain. So that's an example of like you make and then you reflect on what you made and you make connections with the content, in science. And this was a completely kind of done within the constraints of, the normal class periods, following the standards and everything. And I think it's really nice to see that this is not like a crazy thing, because if you look at the US next generation science standards, this idea of generating solutions, building prototypes, optimizing a solution, a lot of these maker activities that we're talking about, they are actually in the standards. And, it might sound like, oh, what's the big deal? But it took 30 years of like research and, kind of lobbying and trying to get those words into the national standards of the US. So what this means is that you can actually do all of that and you'll be following the standards, which I think is an amazing thing. So now Nathan will talk about another example.
Great, thank you. So, I was trying to think of an example that might exist in non-STEM type classrooms, right? So maybe an art classroom or maybe a social studies or a civics classroom. And I think, a common thing to do is invite young people to think about their community and think about things they might want to change, or think about a piece of art they might want to create that represents their community, or something to that effect, or maybe a political action that, a survey they want to create to try to create something new in their community. And what would that look like? How can we think about doing that kind of an experience in a classroom? I like to think of this as this type of an experience as really, instead of just what's going on in your community now, what do you not like? I like to think of it as what could we create? What's a future we want to make for ourselves? And I like this this future cone from Dunn and Raby, and they talk about something called speculative design. And the idea here is to start with our current existence, our present, to start thinking about the technologies that we have, the social systems we have, the societies we have, and try to project out possible futures that could emerge from the places that we are now. What would that future look like, right? This is exciting. This is an exciting thing to do and an exciting thing to ask kids to do, but it's also something that I think as educators we need to be thoughtful about, because we need to ask ourselves, what future are we imagining? Who's this future for? We've all seen the movies, we've all read the books, there's lots of really cool representations and examples of the future, but oftentimes the people who currently have power, the people who currently have the platform to have their stories heard are the ones that get a chance to write those futures. And oftentimes that future for a very narrow portion of the population is a set of it can use to help amplify. It's a set of experiences where a vision I have and I kind of start to bring it into being, like Paulo's dad was talking about. So as educators, when we think about inviting kids to reflect on their current state of their community, or we invite them to reflect on kind of futures they might want, we need to think about that as inviting them to tell their stories, the future that celebrates them, that elevates particular values and their particular perspectives. And in my work, we did this project called Remixing Wakanda. And it was a project with high school girls from New York City, working with comics, educators and activists. And they worked to kind of build and create and design their own future societies, right? They discussed together, first of all, the sort of issues that they face as young women in an urban setting. They brainstorm possible futures. possible societies that might function much like something like Wakanda, if you've read any of the Black Panther comics or if you've seen any of the Black Panther movies, a place that's uncolonized, a place that grows from their histories, that grows from their communities' perspectives. And then they explored the practices of existing Ingles to get at different types of materials, the different types they could use, create representations of those future technologies. And then as educators, we try to create a that supported their design practice by giving them different kinds of materials that could be inspirational, right? By providing certain types of tools or technologies where needed. For example, a sewing machine for a young woman who wanted to design a cloak. Sometimes it was just a matter of being an ear to bounce ideas off of, right? And we invited them to reflect not only on who they are and how they live today, but also to reflect on their histories, the histories that include, you know, the places that they grew up, their family members and the professions and the interests of their family members, the fabrics and the textiles that represent their aesthetics. And they spent a few weeks thinking through what kind of future do I want to. We had everything from a paper mache mask that blends magic and technology to allow the wearer to have these kind of these conversations with ancestors. We had a fashion-forward cloak that hides and protects the wearer. We had street lamps powered by trash, buildings powered by plant life, and also, you know, self-sufficient cities where the industries and the professions that exist in various districts all contribute to the health of the prompt. You know, what do you want to change about your community?
Should I keep going and share my screen?
I'm back.
Oh, no, Nathan.
You don't see me, sorry.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I just disappeared all of a sudden. Okay, have you shared your screen, Paolo?
Yeah, I can share. Yeah. So you were here, right?
Not there. Sorry, I'll wrap this. I just wanted to you know, I'm not sure where I disappeared, but you know, wanted to kind of reflect back on the original prompt of thinking about our community, right, and trying to think about something we might want to change in the community. And what I want to suggest is that experience, it's about you know, engaging young people in future thinking and trying to imagine what their future is. How could they design a future that's for them? How could they design a future that speaks to you know, not only their daily experiences in the city, but also the current challenges that we face, such as racism and xenophobia, the need to find clean and sustainable energy sources, and really to think about building possible futures that that elevate and value different ways of living and being, and of valuing one another, and also of the resources that we have on the planet. Okay. Would you like me to share again, Paulo?
Yeah. We just have one more.
I think it's just a couple more slides, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Yeah. So I think.
Okay. We see the slides.
Yeah. So also I want to thank you for all the comments in the on the chat. Of course, as we're talking, we cannot read all of them, but you know, we'll address them during the Q&A. So you know, we talked today about you know, why maker education, where it comes from, how it's important to have, you know, to do it with understanding. So I think we just wanted to kind of summarize 4 points that I think are important. So one is it's not just about the technology. It's not about buying stuff and buying, tons of expensive equipment and all of that. You have to start from the empowerment and the learning that this will, generate in your students. So sometimes, I think some people asked, what if I don't have a makerspace? I mean, there are ways that you can, focusing on the empowerment and the learning, start with something simpler that can later grow into like a full-blown space. So, just keep that focus in mind. The second thing is, as I said, it's not just about hands-on. It's not just about keeping your hands busy. It's about reflection. It's about thinking about what you're doing and engaging in the cycles of making and reflection, right? So if you're in a makerspace and kids they never stop, they just do stuff all the time, you might be missing the reflection part. The third thing that Nathan talked a lot about in the Wakanda project, and we talked throughout, is don't just trivialize culture, values, and interests. Try to really get to know deeply who those students are, what's meaningful to them, and how you can create learning environments that take that into consideration in a real way. And finally, don't oversimplify. So a lot of times I hear from people, they say, oh, my kids cannot do it. It's too hard. I will, trim it down, make it simpler and simpler and simpler. So simple that it's boring, right? So simple that it's too easy, and kids are not really challenged to do anything, right? Interesting. So I think that's another thing. Often we forget that kids love challenges. Of course, it shouldn't be too hard a challenge, but the idea is don't oversimplify, and sometimes it's good to have a challenge that is not just too easy, right? And that's part of the idea of Constructionism, is to face those challenges, learn from them, and part of the work, the magic of the maker teacher is to do all those four things in their schools. And the good news is that we have seen that this is not just desirable, but it's absolutely possible, and it's a once in a generation chance that we have to make it at scale. So Nathan and I are really excited about this moment in history in education, because it's easier than ever to convince people that this is important. And just a couple of notes before we end. One is that Nathan and I co-chair a conference called FabLearn, which is exactly for educators and also researchers and kids themselves to come and discuss and share work. And the next one will be in New York in October, but virtual New York, because we can have large gatherings. So if you're interested, check out the website of FabLearn. You can soon you'll be able to register for the conference, which will be virtual on Zoom. And finally, if you're interested in learning more, we have a program that collects best practices in maker education and publishes these books called Meaningful Making that are free to download. So you can just Google FabLearn Meaningful Making books, and you can download the free PDFs, or you can also, if you want to get the physical ones, you can find them online as well. So those are resources written by teachers for teachers, and might help you in many different ways. So with that, thank you very much. And just one quick thing, like the character in the beginning was like fictional. I mean, that was total nonsense I was talking about. So just don't take that seriously. Anyways, and Nathan also has an announcement.
Oh no, I also want to announce we have a book coming out in the fall that kind of captures a lot of the different empirical research, and also the theoretical work that is not only the foundation of the constructionist thought that Paulo brought up, but also a lot of the new and kind of evolved ways that we're thinking about these things today, and may interest you. So I think we have a little time for Q&A if Charles can join us and help us navigate that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, probably the number one question was a few people joined late, and it'd be great if you could just clarify the critique of Silicon Valley there.
Paulo, you want to take that?
Yes, sorry, you broke up the critique of?
The critique of Silicon Valley.
Oh, Silicon Valley. So to elaborate on that? Yeah, so I think, the point of our little improv here was that a lot of times people in Silicon Valley, and I lived there for 10 years, they are technologists that don't really know much about education. And they come sometimes with solutions that are under-specified, very vague, don't have any theory behind them, and are very and underestimate, the complexities of real schools. And often they also come with very good PR teams that, sometimes convince district superintendents or principals to buy a lot of stuff. And we think that's a real problem, because a lot of times those, services or products are really not based on any real evidence that they work. Right?
Great, thanks so much. The next most popular question was about social distancing in the classroom when school is allowed back, and how teachers can navigate social distancing and while doing making activities.
Right. I think this is a really important and also a difficult question. I mean, I don't know, maybe Paulo has all the right answers, but I don't feel like I have yet the answer for how we solve this. I will say that I don't believe, and I hope we made that clear throughout our conversation today, that making is really only about maker spaces. Making can happen in lots and lots of different areas and contexts and locations. And I think, if you invite your students to sort of use materials that they have around them, they're likely to have materials that will be inspirational and useful and interesting around them. Cardboard and paper and glue and those popsicle sticks that you can get for free, you don't have to get from Silicon Valley, are just as good sometimes, right? But I do think we need to think about how can we also support the social interaction that's so important in making, that sharing that Paulo talked about, the critique. And so, one idea that I've had is to sort of have kind of a persistent Zoom room or persistent Google Hangout room where people, when they're working on their projects, can kind of log in and just have open to chat with one another, or to sort of show existing works in progress and demonstrate that together. And then to also probably hold some smaller, one-off sessions where you demonstrate how to use various kinds of tools and technologies and support that important debugging process that happens too, or to use the breakout rooms, or to use small groups where students can help and support one another in that collaboration practice as well.
Great, yeah, work in progress. The next, a few people were asking a version of that their students are highly motivated to making type activities and less motivated to do traditional instructional activities. And how do you navigate the tension between those two things, given that the traditional activities aren't necessarily going away?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll do a quick version of that, and Nathan, feel free to. But I think one of the real problems, I think, with schooling is that it's surrounded by all this kind of bureaucratic requirements of standards and tests and all kinds of things, right? And they are very slow to change. They are very hard to. They're not very flexible and all of that. And I think one of the things about this new social distancing time and kids being at home and all of that is that maybe it might not be so bad if they explore ideas and topics that are more interesting to them, even if they are not like completely aligned with standards. But I think it's a really interesting challenge for parents and teachers to try to say, okay, we're going to go a little bit off script in our textbook or like state standards, but let's look at stuff in your environment and think about stuff you are interested in. So maybe it's the ants, in the house. Maybe it's the plants. Maybe it's something about cooking in a different way. Maybe it's about why the moon is the way it is. So I think it's also a good time to look at what kids like and what they make, and try to infuse a little bit more, knowledge and understandings of how things work in things they already like and do. And I think that's it would be great,
Yeah, and I'll just add briefly. I mean, there's so much going on in the world right now that matters. And my third grader was doing a unit on the American flag, and not once did anyone talk about that this is one flag, and there could be other flags that people could create. And there's all sorts of flags for people's communities, and the flag has certain kinds of meanings. And is that meaning that we still stand behind? Is there different kinds of things? There's all sorts of conversations that we can have, I think, that do fit the standards in some ways. And if we just sort of give ourselves a little flexibility to go outside what we're used to and to ask questions where we could get lots of answers and we're not sure what those answers might be, and have the comfort and the boldness to do that, I think young people are excited to have those conversations, and then the kinds of experience, the kinds of projects that we can engage them in, even if they're somewhat standard types of projects, can invite them to do some real thinking, and invite them to be critical, invite them to ask questions, and that's really what a lot of this is about.
Great. Well, thank you both. I think that's time for us. Do you want to just say one more word about where people can find access to your work and making work generally?
Sure. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you all for being here. You can find me on Twitter at @NRHolbert. Also, my lab is called the Snow Day Learning Lab, and you can find that at snowdaylearning.org. And yeah, be great. Feel free to send me an email or a message anytime.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Charles, and everyone who is watching. So, my Twitter handle is Paulo Blickstein. My lab is the TLT Lab, the Transformative Learning Technologies Lab. So it's tltlab.org. And we have a ton of free resources for teachers at fablearn.org as well. And the conference that we mentioned, would love to see you there this year. And, would love to keep the conversation going with all of you. And it's been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.